I'm going to set this to record here, just in case we run into any technical difficulties, which we won't, hypothetically. All right. So I'm going to start the process of going live, and I think we'll just really start with kind of who you are and what you do, and
Sure.
And yeah, just let it flow. I'm psyched that you're into that. All right. So we'll start this process here. It does take a quick second. Okay. Yes. Oh, come on, Facebook. Don't give me trouble today. I'm not in the mood. All right. Let's see here. Well, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. All right. Almost there. Almost there. Okay. All right, I'm gonna put a quick title in here. All right, I'm gonna hit this go live button. I'm gonna wait for it to pop up over here so I can see us in all of our glory. Oh, that happened fast, fantastic. I'm gonna wait for it to pop up over here so I can see us. All right. This is wonderful. We are live. So welcome everyone this week to So Ask Us. We are talking with David Ziomek, who is the Director of Conservation and Development, as well as Assistant Town Manager for the Town of Amherst. Dave, thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we finally made this happen.
Sure, happy to be here today.
All right, let me make sure I can see people's questions because I know that they'll have them. So I would love to just start because that was a lot of title that I just gave, Director of Conservation and Development and Assistant Town Manager. So I think the best place to start is to hand it over to you for just kind of a snapshot of who you are and what you do for the Town of Amherst.
Sure, happy to do that, Hannah. So I think as most people know, I did grow up in Amherst. I've lived a number of different places and had a number of different jobs through the years, but very fortunate to be in this position of Assistant Town Manager, and I oversee the functional area within the town that is named Conservation and Development. And so it's a great position. It's a unique position. I think in a town the size of Amherst. And so my job touches a lot of different areas. So certainly conservation, planning, zoning, inspection services, and then I work on a number of special projects that are assigned by the town manager. But it's really unique. I get to work with a tremendous staff here within the departments I just mentioned, and then I get to interact with people on projects that help to make our community a better place for people to work and live and raise their kids and also visit here as tourists. So I also work closely with the university and Amherst and Hampshire College on a number of initiatives. So it's really great to be here today and happy to take any of your questions.
This is so fantastic. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the openness that you're coming to in this conversation. And we've had the really good fortune in the last few weeks. We're kind of slowly talking to every single person in town hall. And I have felt the impact of that personally, just in, you know, being someone who returned to this area. I did grow up here, but returning to the area about 3 years ago, having the wonderful good fortune to get a job in Amherst that's very plugged in. So, I mean, there are a million questions I want to ask you, but the first one kind of comes out of that. You know, you're interacting with so many players, right? So many stakeholders from, you know, the town itself, the community, the university, the colleges. How do you keep your mind on all the values, all the importance that different groups are sort of placing on the work that you're spearheading? How do you make sure you're keeping an eye on it all?
Mm. Well, that's a great question. It can become a little daunting sometimes, but
Yeah.
again, I think, you know, first of all, I think where I come from is a really core set of values that really drive me to care deeply about Amherst, to care
Yes.
about the history of Amherst, you know, where we are today and where we want to go. So that's always front and center for me
Oh,
is thinking what's best for the community, what's best for the residents. Um, and that's really across the board. What's best for everybody who lives in Amherst, and you know we have a very diverse number of people and kinds of people, and people coming here to study for 4 years, people coming here to go to graduate school, people
yeah.
coming here from other parts of the world, other parts of the country. And so there's a lot of opinions. So it's part of it is balancing all of those needs and saying, okay, how can we find what's best moving forward on a zoning issue, on a conservation issue, on a development issue.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and I would just also go back to, I think right now we're very fortunate to have, you know, our town manager has been with us for a number of years, Paul Bockelman. We changed our form of government a few years ago. And I
Yeah.
think our 13-member town council, is very committed and very focused on quality of life and how do we make this new form of government as efficient, as responsive, as open,
Mm,
and as transparent as possible.
yeah.
And you know, Paul and I and the various department heads spent a lot of time focused on how do we be as transparent in budgeting, in project planning as we possibly can. So
Right.
I think that's really those are foundational pieces of what we're doing and how we want to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very clear. Really, I appreciate that answer. I feel like
Mm.
that really paints a picture of the approach. And I feel so much in talking with you that your the sort of trajectory of your interest bringing you to this point of doing the work that you do in Amherst. I mean, do you feel like growing up here has really informed the paths that you took as far as your education and the work that you were looking to do? Or do you feel that there's sort of, it's just been serendipitous that your career path has brought you to a place where you have these interests and these skills that so fit in with where Amherst is at in this moment?
Um, well, that's a tougher question.
Sorry.
I guess I guess what I would say is that you know, I certainly try to find that balance, and that title says it all, Director of
Yeah,
Conservation and Development. So
yeah,
over the last couple of years, you know, 5 or 7 years, I've really kind of found a good balance, I think. And so my job is equal parts conservation. Probably these days, it's it's heavier actually on the development. What is the right development for the town of Amherst?
yeah,
What kinds of development do we want? What kinds of development does the master plan say we should have with regard to densifying our village centers, working on affordable housing? Just a week ago, you know, I had the good fortune of working with the Housing Trust and some of my staff to close on a piece of property on Belchertown Road in Southeast Amherst, in the East Amherst Village Center. And we purchased about 3 acres of land that will one day be an affordable housing development. And, that's the kind of thing that, 15, 20 years ago, I never really thought I would be working on, but now it's simply part of my job and the
Right.
incredible staff that I have, and working with John Hornick and the Housing Trust. It's just a natural thing now that we need to look at all aspects of our community.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're looking at how do we improve the open space that we've already purchased, while at the same time balancing the need for new growth, to balance our tax base, to encourage job growth, and to make sure that we have commercial and retail opportunities that meet the needs of Amherst residents now and in the years ahead. So
Yeah.
there's never 2 days in my schedule that are really the same.
Yeah.
And 2 meetings. One minute I can be meeting on homelessness, and the next minute I can be meeting on, project planning for summer 2021 Puffer's
Right.
Pond. How are we going to manage Puffer's Pond? And the next minute I can be talking to a developer who might want to put in a mixed-use building on University Drive. So
Right.
that's the kind of day, and those are the kinds of weeks that I have.
Yeah. Do you like it that way?
Oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's
I
great.
figured you did, but
Yeah.
I should ask.
No, I wouldn't change that at all. It's the challenge is how do you keep juggling all of those things and make
Yeah.
sure that, you have 10, 15 plates in the air and you don't want to drop one, because
Right.
that could mean a project or that could mean some
Right.
initiative. But I have to say right now, we're managing vaccine clinics.
Yeah.
We're managing the pandemic, across departments, and I think the town and the community has done an amazing job. But as we look ahead to coming out of the pandemic, and I'd love to talk about some of the projects we have on
Yeah.
the horizon, but there's a lot of exciting things that are happening around Amherst.
Yes, absolutely. And I have so many questions about them. I do have a quick question coming through from
Sure.
Allie. Um, she says, how will the town conservation office move to finalize business that has started before the town government changed? For example, the renewal of conservation lease at 50 Station Road, which is not something I'm familiar with. I will pass that question to you.
Um, okay, that's a very specific question about a particular piece of property. Um, yeah, I think that's a conversation to be had with the owner of the business at 50 Station Road.
Okay.
There is the town owns over maybe I'll broaden it a little bit, but the town owns over 2,000 acres of conservation land, some of which those properties are leased or have licenses. A license is really a shorter term commitment. So we have licenses with farmers to use conservation land, maybe for things like pasture land or agricultural row crops, things of that sort. Like at Amethyst Brook, we have a license there for a farmer to use part of Amethyst Brook. Haskins Meadow up on East Leverett Road is a license situation. And then we have a few leases around town, which are longer. That lease that was asked about, I believe was originally a 30-year lease. And I think there's somewhere in the order of 10 years left on that lease. So the current owner of the equestrian operation there would like to engage with the town to see if there's a way to extend that lease longer so that they could continue to have their business there. And I think we've had some preliminary conversations with that owner, and we need to have some more, obviously,
Yeah.
to see where that's going to go in the future.
Yeah. And Allie, thank you for that question. And it's so helpful, I think, sometimes you talk about transparency, to open up some of the processes, especially around conservation and development, because there are so many layers to how things happen and how things get done. And I'm going to pull out just one part of the question that I would like to ask about, because a change in government, a change in town government, city government, is a huge thing. And I am cognizant of, especially going from something like town meeting to something like a council. How have you found that transition to be for you as someone who's really working with different stakeholders, keeping an eye on things? Do you feel like the change has been smooth, has been helpful? I mean, anything that you want to share about what that process has been like? Because I know there are other towns that consider things like this, might be coming up on a change themselves.
Well, I think overall, I think it's gone very, very well. Again, I can't say enough about, the role that our town manager has played in that
Yeah,
process. And we've had, wonderful leadership from Lynn Gristmere as the president of the council, really charting a path and keeping us all moving forward because,
yeah,
it was it was a tremendous amount of work for dozens and dozens of people to actually
right,
move from the town meeting form of government to the council form of government. And then simply getting the processes and the procedures in place. I think there was in the first year of the council, there was kind of a standard response of we're flying the plane, but at the same time, we're building it as we're
right,
flying it. So
right,
the council needed to move forward because, you know, residents expect government to be working for them. So
right.
they expect things to be approved, budgets to be developed and approved, services to continue to be presented to residents. And so all of that happened while the council was really moving forward with establishing their procedures and policies and
Mm,
process. So I give them great credit for doing that. Um, I have found the 13 members to be extremely dedicated,
yeah,
extremely knowledgeable, but they're also very willing to learn. They're very open to hearing from department heads at various
mhm,
meetings about, whether it's something to do with the broad scope of what the DPW does or
right,
what the health department does. And of course, we then went into the pandemic, which required a whole new set of meetings and discussions about how do we move through and keep our residents safe.
yeah,
So I think this is the third year of the council, the initial council, their first term. So we'll have to see what happens as we move forward.
right.
Who will run again and who won't. But I think they've done an amazing job of in this transition of government.
I really think so too. And what a thing to have a pandemic in the second year. Be like, hope you're all up to speed because
Mhm.
that is it has been an amazing challenge. I think
Yeah.
everyone has really risen to the occasion. Ali, thank you again for that question.
I,
Um,
I will say that
yeah,
one of the things that is front and center with the council right now is zoning. So,
yes,
um, my staff, Rob Mora, the building commissioner, and Chris Brestrup, the planning director, and their staffs have been working very hard for months, with direction from the council
right.
and the Community Resources Committee, the CRC, to really say, okay, it's time for us to really kind of unpack our current zoning and take a look at what are those areas, what are those shortcomings that we need to address, and
Mm,
how do we move forward with zoning. So in this last year of the council's first term, there's going to be a lot of focus on zoning and
yeah.
zoning reform.
Yes, and that actually flows into the question that I wanted to ask, and I would love if you can touch on a couple things. One, kind of what zoning is for anyone who might not totally understand, and I will put it out there as well that Counselor Evan Ross in Amherst has a really great primer video that he created about zoning. It is specific to Amherst, and you can find it online, but it actually, I mean, I live in Greenfield, and we're having a lot of the same zoning conversations. So if you're tuning in from a different town other than Amherst, it's still a very helpful primer that he put together about what zoning is, because I think a lot of towns are working on that right now. But my question for you, Dave, is, kind of going into I think people would find conservation and development to be somewhat conflicting. That tends to be the sort of traditional way of looking at them, that you can't have development that doesn't negatively impact conservation, and you can't have conservation that doesn't keep out what might be potentially good development. But you have really found a way, and I think a very unique balance, somewhat based on your background and your history of being here, to make sure that those two things are being considered at the same time. And you found a way to really execute both. So if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about different development projects that are underway in Amherst and maybe how conservation comes in, and then also a little bit about the unique sort of downtown village center spread that Amherst has that comes into conservation and development in a somewhat unique way.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there in that.
I know.
In the question. So, well, let me start off by first saying it's not really me that, I don't have the decision-making power authority to set all of these directional pieces
Sure.
of the master plan and zoning and things of that sort. Part of my job is I see as working with the various boards and committees who do set that policy,
Yeah.
from the council to the planning board to the conservation commission and many, many other committees and boards that we have. We in Amherst, I'll go back to kind of the conservation piece. So Amherst has for probably 60 or 65 years prioritized the protection of open space. I think we were one of the early leaders in Massachusetts in protecting land for agricultural purposes, for water quality purposes, and for really kind of a balance of development and preservation. I think I came on at the perfect time, and followed a gentleman by the name of Pete Westover, who was the conservation director. And when I came on board, our town manager at the time, Barry Del Castillo, said, "Dave, I'd really like you to play a different role in town. I understand the conservation piece, but we really need somebody that can really span both the conservation side and the development side, and try to work to articulate a balance of those needs."
Yes.
And so that's really what I've spent a lot of my time doing, is trying to work between and among the various boards and committees and with my staff to find that. And so I think that's why I'm now, and have for years been around the table when we're talking about, building, buildings, for instance, on University Drive. We've also, our efforts to preserve open space have really kind of plateaued a bit. And we're very strategic now. I think at one time when people in Amherst were very fearful of development, we were buying land at a very, very rapid pace. And I think now we try to really highly prioritize those acquisitions to make sure they're the most important land. I mean, I think Hickory Ridge Golf Course is a great example in South Amherst. It's an area that has very high ecological value, but also potentially has the ability to help us connect a number of different communities, some of those being underserved communities, with the village center at Pomeroy Village Center, which is kind of an evolving, growing village center in South Amherst. So the goal of acquiring Hickory Ridge is not a singular goal of ecological restoration or preservation. It's really, there are some development aspects to buying Hickory Ridge. And we're even going to look at the area where the clubhouse currently is, and through a master planning process for that land, say, what are some of the potential uses for the already developed area at Hickory Ridge? So it's really bringing together the planning aspects, the conservation aspects, the community development aspects to say, okay, what can this asset be for us? It's 150 acres. Much of it is in floodplain. Much of it is in rare and endangered species habitat. But those areas that aren't, what can they be and how can they serve the residents of South Amherst? So that's a small example. On zoning, I mean, I'm not a zoning expert. I think it'd be great to have, Chris Brestrup and Rob Mora on your show at some
Yeah,
point to talk specifically about zoning and where we're going with that. But zoning is a tool. I mean, these are the laws, rules, and regulations that help towns in Massachusetts to direct where development goes and what kind of development happens. Where should residential development go? Where should commercial development go? And what separates the kinds of development from,
right,
one or another? And what are some of the safety aspects, traffic safety, for instance, things of that sort. So, you've got that great image behind you
yes,
of the North Square. So again, looking at, what is the zoning for the North Square,
right,
where we have always planned for more density. And if you think of concentric circles moving out from the density of the North Square proper, that zoning would call for less and less density as you move out from the village
right,
center. And that's really what we have in North Amherst. You look at the first circle being, kind of Summer Street and Montague Road. And then as you move out from there, you're getting into residential zoning, which has
mhm,
less density. And then you get out into agricultural areas where we're preserving, agricultural operations like out on Route 116, Sunderland Road to some degree, and over onto Meadow Street.
yeah.
Um, so, so zoning there'll be a lot more to talk about. Zoning could be an entire show for you, an entire
It
program.
probably will be.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you for all of that info. I mean, there's so much there, and I will link to Evan's primer on this show
Yeah.
so folks can
Oh,
take a deeper dive. But I really appreciate you kind of touching on the balance that you're keeping and the reasons behind acquisition, because I feel like that is such it's a crucial conversation that sometimes um, happens behind closed doors. And again, going back to really being impressed with the transparency that Amherst is trying to bring to these different processes, like you coming on here. And you and I had, when we were sort of prepping for this call, and we got into talking about placemaking and how placemaking sort of fits into this development and conservation conversation. I mean, for instance, I had a really positive experience recently when we put together the Story Walk in North Amherst, which is at Mill River Recreation on the Julius Lester Trail. And I went through the processes that I believe anyone would go through. I had to get up in front of the Conservation Commission, which was one of the most tightly run meetings I have been to in a long time. It was a little intimidating and very impressive. And there was a lot of community input in that meeting, even over Zoom, since we were in the pandemic. And making sure, to me, it's always been incredibly important to make sure that any project I'm working on that touches development is really a community-minded, community-forward process, whether it's gathering feedback or being transparent about what's happening. And even something like a story walk really impacted the community, and we got a lot of feedback, almost all of it positive, which is great, but still making sure that we are plugging into, I think you said at the beginning, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. That is very much what I think about and what we think about in developing the Mill District in North Amherst, is that it's plugged into all of those different questions of how we leverage history, how we create something new, and how we create something sustainable. And I'm curious, when your career has really spanned a lot of different things, and if you don't mind sharing a little bit of sort of the trajectory of it between doing environmental work. You also have a background in higher education, which certainly comes into your work working in Amherst, and staying connected to those higher ed bodies that are also players. How has your career path kind of weaved in and out of different kinds of placemaking and different kinds of conservation and development over in different towns and different spaces?
mm. Well, I've certainly done a lot of work in a number of towns throughout Massachusetts. Most of my career has been spent here in Massachusetts. But yeah, I mean, I have a biology undergraduate degree and a couple of master's degrees, one in environmental planning and the other one in higher ed administration. Essentially, I at one point thought I would work in higher ed and did
Right.
work in the university in career development for a few years. Um, I've also worked, and we're talking about placemaking a little bit, but worked in Turner's Falls for the Montague EDIC, Economic Development and Industrial Corporation, for 7 or 8 years earlier in my career, really trying to help Turner's Falls, which is this wonderful Franklin County village,
Yeah.
to create a sense of place. I was fortunate enough to work on a project called the Great Falls Discovery Center there, which is still open today,
And
which
I
is
was,
really a museum, an interactive museum focused on the Connecticut River Valley. But my work there was with businesses, with local leaders, with the government in Montague and in the village of Turner's Falls specifically, to really create a sense of place. And the two vehicles we had, at least that I was working on, was one was the development of this old mill complex, and
mhm,
then the development of a bike path along the canal side rail trail there, bike path. So you know, placemaking and celebrating that history of a place has always been part of an interest of mine and part of the work that I've been doing. And you were talking a little bit about our story walk project that you initiated along the trails at Mill River. And again, as we look at the Mill District and we look at the potential for appropriate new growth
right.
in retail, in commercial, in residential, we also have to take a look at that kind of balance of saying, how do we maintain the open space, both the trail system that we have, the open space, the open land that we have, and the agricultural land that we have. And all of those come into play in my job and when I'm working with my staff. And Puffer's Pond is right up the street from you all, and it's a great example of really how do we find those balances. A couple of years ago, the town took some initial steps, and I hope there'll be more steps, but we took some initial steps to try to help with the management of Puffer's Pond a little bit
Mhm,
better. And those were really to kind of redefine parking, a small but important step. We
yeah.
redefined the parking on State Street. And I think it made all the difference in the world to really say, there's now an order, there's a rhyme and reason to how you can park on State Street, because for so long, people who love Puffer's Pond would flock there in the summer, and it got a little out of control sometimes. So I think
Yeah.
we're making incremental progress there, but we need to do more. And one of the things that I hope to do, as I continue my career with Amherst, is that we make sure that we invest in maintaining the areas that we have already preserved, as well as the buildings that we currently own or the open spaces that we oversee. So whether it's Puffer's Pond, investing the appropriate amount of money, managing Puffer's Pond and caring for Puffer's Pond, or the North Common, which is a project that I've been working on with staff
Right.
and committees and boards for the last 8 or 10 years. And our hope is to really invest in the North Common and give it a sense of place so
Yeah.
that people really want to be there, 8 or 9 months a year. And it was
Yeah.
interesting during the pandemic that in order to facilitate social distancing, the town put out 6 or 8 picnic tables, a very simple step. And it was amazing how many more people used the North Common than ever before. So
Yeah.
on Monday night, there'll be another discussion about the North Common project on the town council meeting agenda, and we'll see what direction the town council wants us to take. But my hope is that we will improve the North Common and really make it a destination, so that when people come to downtown, they say, "Wow, I really want to spend time out there," whether it's working on my computer or meeting friends or having a meal or just relaxing, listening to music, a concert, a small play, a theater production, etc. So I guess it all does come back to placemaking, Hannah.
It does, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
No,
Anyway.
I appreciate that. And I know that, you know, the North Common is a really good example of a project that people have a lot of opinions about. And so you guys are holding a huge amount of information. And, you know, I think one of the things that I think is really lovely about your position spanning this sort of conservation and development um, sort of spread is that conservation and so much of environmental work is really focused on sustainability. And I think sometimes people think that developers are not as focused on that, when in actuality, I mean, sustainability in the sense of, am I creating a space that is going to continue to serve, continue to be a draw, continue to be able to develop with the town over time? And when you're talking about, you know, different ways to program it, at first it's just somewhere that people are sitting outside and kind of getting comfortable and acclimated. But, you know, when we talked to Jennifer Moyston last week, and she's talking about events that are happening and ways that those tie in, and she wants to see that space be a place that people gather and become more comfortable, you know, gathering in front of town hall and identifying with it. I mean, it starts to impact everything. How do you, and I did see another question come through, but I want to ask quickly, you know, and it's a little bit of a tough question, but at what point do you feel like the professionals who are really looking at that big picture and holding the responsibility of creating a sustainable space, when do you know to sort of make a decision? You've heard a lot of feedback, it's time to make a decision and sort of move forward with something. How do you kind of know that that moment has come for you as a planner and as someone who's getting so much feedback and then having to decide something?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's, for me, I think it's kind of a combination of experience, knowing experience, and just kind of background and knowledge, saying this is something we should do. This is something that needs to be done. But we also, that's combined with, you know, because I work for the residents of Amherst, I work for the taxpayers of Amherst. So we need to listen. We always need to be open to what the feedback we're getting from our residents, from the people we work for, and the reason we do our jobs is to try to improve the quality of life for the people in town and those people who come to Amherst. So,
Yeah.
You know, I'll give one small example, but you know, recreation areas. I come from a family that is deeply, you know, rooted in recreation. My dad was the superintendent of public works here for 40 years and cared deeply about athletics and sports and the importance it plays in our lives from a health standpoint and a community building standpoint. But you know, when I first started my job, I was hearing from a lot of members of committees and boards and residents that, boy, we need to make improvements in our recreation areas. And so through the years, I've had the good fortune to work with people in DPW, people in planning, people in the leisure services department and commission, now called Amherst Recreation, to really work on, you know, improving War Memorial Pool and renovating War Memorial Pool, improving and renovating Mill River Pool. We're now doing the town is now doing the basketball courts there. We're going to do some work on the tennis courts. We just completed in South Amherst about a 5-year project to redo the playground, do a brand new playground, and do a spray park there. We were hearing for many years, why doesn't Amherst have a spray park? So we listened, we went out, we found grant money, we used CPA dollars, and we created a spray park. So it's part of being open, but also trying to be responsive to what people are interested in having, the amenities that people want to have, and then kind of going with your gut that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And that, you know, whether it's the North Common, whether it's the spray park in South Amherst, a dog park. I don't have a dog. I've never had a dog as an adult. I've not had a dog, but we heard loud and clear that people said Amherst should have a dog park.
Yeah.
So we are under construction out on Route 9 at the old landfill. And we approached it as sustainably as we possibly could too,
Hmm.
because that's one of the lenses we use for projects. We said, let's try not to buy a new piece of property, because
Right.
that does a couple of things. One, it costs the town taxpayers money and it takes land off the tax rolls.
Mm,
Let's look for land that the town already owns. And we looked at 5 or 6 sites and we landed on the old landfill. Let's make it safe. We did
yeah.
all of the environmental testing. We are bringing in a tremendous amount of fill to kind of put over the cap of the landfill, because we need to make sure that the cap is protected.
Right.
And we made it of a size that was responsive to what we heard from the state, because there's a rare bird that nests out of the old landfill. So all of those factors combined, we went out and we got the project funded by a private foundation, and a modest amount of CPA dollars, and we will have a dog park later on this year. So again, all of those factors came together. Great volunteer support with our
Yeah.
dog park task force, and we're trying to be responsive to interest and create projects that make quality of life here better.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you for outlining all of those. I don't want to miss the question that came
Sure.
through. Look back here. Oh, and this is good because we're getting close to time, and I did want to ask a little bit about kind of the pandemic's impact. So the question coming through is whether Amherst has been hurt by a lack of tourism this last year, and kind of how plans are moving to really open up again, which is a very timely question with more information coming down from the governor. And then I would just add to that, what has this time, you sort of started to touch on it a little bit, what has this time kind of afforded Amherst as far as really looking at how we interact with our public space, things like outdoor dining and things that might stick around post-pandemic, because picnic tables on the common, because people really seemed to gravitate towards that.
Mhm. Well, first of all, Hannah, I feel like we might need a little more time, so I'm happy to go over a bit. So
Okay,
don't
great.
feel constrained too much by that time.
I appreciate that.
So the first part of that question, I think, was about tourism, and there's no doubt
Yeah.
2020 was a very difficult year for Amherst and for communities all over the country.
Yeah.
But drilling down to Amherst, and Paul and I work very closely with our bid in our chamber, and fairly early on in the pandemic, we set up very regular check-ins with the bid in the chamber, to really see how the town's work and the bid in the chamber's work could really be coordinated to make sure
Yeah.
that we were being as responsive as we could to the needs of businesses, both retail and restaurants. But there's no question. I mean, the impact was tremendous and kind of staggering to local businesses. And sadly, we will see a number of them not return and not recover. And I think certainly people listening to this know through their connections with some of the owners and the regular places that we all like to go. Some of them will not make it through the pandemic.
Right.
Our goal in recent months has to really try to shore up those establishments that we think will make it through. And we've done a couple of things. Through working through our community development block grant program, we created a small program that is focused on micro businesses.
Yeah.
So we are giving out micro business grants, ranging from $5,000 to $10,000 to help businesses get through the pandemic, and they can pay some of the approved expenses that they might have, be it personnel or rent or supplies, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
The other thing we worked really hard with the Bid and Chamber on is trying to create outdoor spaces for restaurants. And that I think was given the scale and the scope of the pandemic, we did the very best we could. And you saw outdoor dining go
Right.
well into the fall. And I want to address something you said a minute ago about what things might have lasting effects moving
Yeah.
forward. So right now, here it is, the first week in March, we are preparing, our DPW is working with our Bid and Chamber to prepare for outdoor dining again. So our goal is to have a very similar setup downtown starting around April 1st, the first week in April. Um, we will put out the barriers, we will put out the tables, the chairs, the heaters, with the goal of trying to jumpstart the downtown economy and the help these restaurants to get out there and bring people to downtown and bring people to Amherst. I think what we've learned about through the pandemic, we've learned a lot. But one thing is, I think there's been an overwhelmingly positive response. People want more outdoor spaces. They want more outdoor dining. They want music. Anything we can do to activate as many spaces in our downtown and our village centers as possible. And I think you've had some success, of course, up in the North Square.
Yeah.
We need to do as much as we possibly can. So we're also looking at, what are the possibilities for expanding sidewalks in downtown, creating more walkable, bikeable spaces in downtown. How do we provide more space for those restaurants who want, 8 or 9 months of outdoor dining?
Right.
And I think for many of your listeners, whether you've been to Shelburne Falls, whether you've been to Northampton, whether you've been to other communities throughout New England, those communities that create both indoor and outdoor spaces that complement one another, those are the ones that are the most successful. They're the most sustainable. They're the most flexible, weather-wise, and as we all learned in the pandemic, the need for spacing was key, and
Yeah.
those restaurants that were able to do it survive.
Right. Right.
More of the same, and I think we're going to work with the chamber, and our planning department to really say what are some of the long-term improvements we can implement. We just got a grant. We just got an announcement of a grant we got yesterday from the Mass DOT, and it's about a $200,000 grant, and that'll allow us to do some. We're going to be focusing in on the Boltwood area of our downtown, where the Boltwood garage is. So we'll be putting in some sidewalk improvements, a new ramp to make things more accessible for seniors and other people using our downtown. And then the grant also pays for outdoor furniture to activate spaces in the Boltwood area, which is, if people don't know where Boltwood is, it's kind of behind Bueno Isano. Johnny's is there, Matt's Barber Shop, and various other restaurants and businesses. So the idea is to really activate the public spaces that are in that area.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Congratulations on that grant. And it does feel like a lot of sort of financial support is going to be coming to different towns for things exactly like this, realizing the public space can be activated in different ways. So that's so exciting.
Again, I can't say enough. I mean, the Bid and the Chamber has been right there every step of the way with us. They have been leaders. They have been receiving grant funding from a variety of different sources, both public and private, through the pandemic. We mentioned, in our earlier discussion that the town also received a $1.5 million grant for the Pomeroy Village Center, which is down as you go from Amherst Center down to the Hampshire College area down near Atkins.
Yeah.
So we are embarking on a public process to really gather input from residents, from people who use that village center, from the businesses, the property owners, to really say what issues do we currently have there, and what are some ways that we can improve that. And we haven't decided on a design yet. We'll be taking in all of that feedback and then looking at the two logical designs are either an improved signalized intersection or a roundabout. And nothing has been decided at this point. We're going to take in, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of feedback from people who live there, people who work there, bicyclists, cyclists, people who walk in that area. How do we make it safer? How do we move traffic? How do we move bicycles through an intersection safely, and also encourage more residential development there and commercial and retail development. So that's really exciting.
Wonderful. It is really exciting.
So
And I definitely, it's so great to have so much happening downtown in the South Village. And also, as you mentioned, the work that we're doing in North Amherst around the Mill District, similarly with a lot of input and with a lot of aspirations. It's exciting that this is happening throughout.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the pandemic has in some strange ways actually opened our eyes a little bit to what can be. And we've been able to try some things out, and people have really been, quite receptive to it. And some of these things we want to make permanent, right? Some of the things we say, wow, that really worked. Let's try and do more outdoor dining. Let's try and make our downtown and village centers as walkable and bikeable as possible. Because with fewer people on the road during the pandemic, that's what we all did.
Yeah.
We walked more, we biked more. I mean, I can safely say, I think in 2020, our conservation areas saw more use than in any year, at least in my tenure with the town.
Yeah.
Anytime I would go out for a hike, thinking I was going to an area where I might encounter no one, or I might encounter a few people, the trails were packed. Runners, bikers, cross-country skiers, snowshoers, So.
Yeah. That's great. It has been a really interesting year. And I know I think everyone struggles a little bit with the concept of, these sort of COVID silver linings, because it has also been a terrible and hard time. But I think more often than not, I talk to people who either had these sort of epiphanies in their own life as far as getting out more and kind of being a little bit more present in the world and connected in the world. And then certainly people in professional positions who had this totally unexpected opportunity, as you say, to sort of step back and see what was happening and say, oh, I really, your point about recreation centers, and a lot of that was already in the works, certainly before the pandemic. And how fortunate, because now those places where people can get outside are just absolutely vital.
Right. And to that point, our hope is that as more people get vaccinated, and they're, as we move in that direction, that we can begin to, jumpstart again those sports programs, those camps, our pools, our golf courses, all of those things that we know bring quality of life to the people who live in Amherst. If we can get back on that track, there's opportunities for us to improve all of those areas again. I mean, I guess that's one of the themes as we wrap up too, is that I feel as though even though the town has been doing the very best we can to manage the pandemic and try to keep people as safe as possible, we haven't really been resting. We've been going after those grants. We actually have 5 or 6 that are still pending. So our hope is that we will get more grant funding that will, give us additional resources to, work on other projects in town, whether they be new sidewalks or new bridges, new roads, etc.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons for optimism as we hopefully come out of the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. And I wish you and your whole team best of luck in getting that grant funding, and just so appreciate, both as a professional in Amherst and just as a resident of the Valley, seeing the way you work and the work that you've been doing.
Great. Well, thank you, Hannah, and I'm looking forward to working with you. I know you have a new team member there in Tony Maroulis.
Tony Maroulis.
I've already met with Tony, and I'm looking forward to working with Tony and Cinda as you all do your placemaking and think of next projects.
Yes, it's so exciting. Thank you so much, Dave. I hope you have a really great rest of your day and all the meetings that you'll have that are never the same.
Great, Hannah. Well, anytime I'd be happy to come back. Just let me know.
Thank you. I'm going to take you up on that.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks.